The sound of rain tapping against the hospital window was the only thing keeping Oliver Kane awake that afternoon. His shirt was soaked, his hands trembling, and his heart was racing faster than the storm outside. The nurse had just told him that his daughter's surgery could not proceed until the payment was made. A figure so high that it may as well have been the moon. He stared at the white hospital wall, clutching the tiny pink sweater of his 6-year-old daughter Ivy. It still smelled like bubblegum and innocence. His world was small. His daughter's laughter, her tiny fingers wrapped around her voice calling him Daddy. And now, all of it hung by a thread named money. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Journal. Your support helps us bring more true and heartfelt stories like this to life. Oliver wasn't always this broken man fighting to keep his child alive. Once he had dreams, a business, a home, and a wife who had promised forever. But forever ended the day she packed her bags and left, taking every penny in their joint account and leaving him with nothing but debts and a sick child. He drove trucks now, working day and night, sleeping in his cab just to save for Ivy's medical bills. The hospital room had become his second home, its beeping machines a lullaby he'd come to accept. That morning, a letter from the hospital's finance department broke him again. The surgery needed to be prepaid, no exceptions. He begged for time, pleaded for mercy, but the only reply was an apology and a reminder that policy was policy. He sank to the hallway floor, hands covering his face, whispering prayers to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Across town, in a sunlit penthouse overlooking the city, Eleanor Whitmore sipped her coffee beside her husband, Richard, the CEO of Whitmore Aviation, one of the largest helicopter manufacturers in the country. She had everything money could buy: diamond necklaces, imported roses, and a calendar filled with charity galas. But beneath her polished smile, there was a hollow ache she never admitted: the loss of her only son 5 years ago. She had poured herself into her husband's empire, masking her grief with luxury and control. That afternoon, Eleanor received a call from St. Mary's Hospital, requesting her to visit as part of her charitable foundation's review program. She agreed, not knowing that the visit would change her life. When she arrived, the scent of disinfectant and distant cries tugged at something deep within her. The hospital director led her through the children's ward, explaining their funding needs. In one of the rooms, she noticed a man kneeling beside a frail little girl connected to tubes and wires. The man's rough hands brushed her forehead tenderly, his voice breaking as he whispered a lullaby. For a moment, the world stopped. There was something pure, raw, and painfully real about that love, something she hadn't seen in years. Later in the hallway, Eleanor overheard the nurses whispering about the man. A single father, can't pay for the surgery, daughter won't make it through the week. Something inside her cracked open. That night she couldn't sleep. She saw Ivy's pale face every time she closed her eyes, her tiny chest rising weakly with every breath. The next morning, she went back to the hospital alone. When she walked into the room, Oliver rose to his feet, startled. His eyes were dark with exhaustion, his clothes wrinkled, but his posture straightened as if refusing pity. She introduced herself softly, saying she worked with a charity that helped struggling families. Oliver, wary but desperate, told her everything. About Ivy's condition, the unpaid bills, his failed business, and how his ex-wife hadn't even called to ask about their daughter. His voice cracked only once. When he said, "She's all I have left." Eleanor sat beside the bed, gently taking Ivy's hand. "She's beautiful," she whispered. The child smiled weakly and said, "Are you an angel?" Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't answer. That night, Eleanor convinced her husband to donate to the children's wing. "It's good publicity," she said, hiding the tremor in her voice. But she also made a private promise to personally cover Ivy's surgery cost. The hospital staff called Oliver the next morning to say an anonymous donor had paid the full amount. He cried silently, gripping Ivy's hand, whispering, "We're going to make it, baby." Days later, as the surgery began, Eleanor waited outside, pacing, praying, hoping. Emotions she hadn't felt since her own child's operation years ago. When the doctor finally came out smiling and said, "She's going to be fine," Eleanor wept openly. It was the first time in years she had cried, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Oliver never knew who had paid the bill, until 2 weeks later when he returned to the hospital to collect discharge papers and overheard a nurse thanking Mrs. Whitmore for her donation. He stood frozen, realization washing over him. He asked for her address and, after much hesitation, decided to thank her in person. That Saturday afternoon, dressed in his cleanest shirt, he took a bus across town to the Whitmore estate. He stood before the massive gates, unsure if he even belonged on the same sidewalk. The guard was about to turn him away when Eleanor herself appeared, surprised to see him. Oliver stammered, I just wanted to thank you. You saved my daughter's life. I don't know how to repay you." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything. Just take care of her." But as they talked, something unexpected happened. Their conversation stretched from minutes into hours. About loss, loneliness, and the quiet battles people never see. He spoke about Ivy's dreams of becoming a pilot someday, and Eleanor chuckled softly, saying, "Then maybe she'll fly one of our helicopters someday." There was warmth in her tone, something human that had been missing for too long. Over the next few months, Eleanor invited Oliver and Ivy to the company's charity events, ensuring Ivy always had front-row seats. The little girl's laughter filled spaces that had long been silent in Eleanor's heart. But not everyone approved. Her husband, Richard, began to notice the visits, the smiles, and the way Eleanor's eyes lit up whenever Oliver's name was mentioned. One day Richard confronted her, his voice sharp. "You're crossing a line, Eleanor. This man isn't our responsibility." She replied quietly, "Neither was the boy we lost. But if I can save someone else's world, maybe mine can heal a little too." Richard said nothing, but his silence was heavy. Weeks later, Eleanor hosted a corporate celebration at Whitmore Aviation's headquarters. The event was dazzling, executives in tailored suits, crystal chandeliers, cameras flashing. Oliver was there too, helping as a volunteer driver, ferrying guests from the parking lot to the main entrance. He had been hired temporarily by the logistics team, though Eleanor had quietly arranged it herself. Halfway through the evening, Ivy tugged his sleeve, pointing to the rooftop helipad where a helicopter gleamed under the golden sky. "Daddy, can we see it up close?" she asked. Smiling, he carried her up the stairs, letting her peek through the safety glass. The rotor blades glimmered like wings of hope. Downstairs, Richard spotted them and frowned. "What is he doing up there?" he muttered. When Eleanor turned to look, she saw Oliver gently lifting Ivy so she could see better. Her heart softened again, but she knew the tension was about to snap. Moments later, Richard called Oliver down. In front of the guests, he asked coldly, "You seem very comfortable here for someone who doesn't belong. What are you doing at my event?" The crowd grew quiet. Oliver, holding Ivy's hand, stayed calm. "I work for your logistics team tonight, sir." "Just helping where I can," Richard sneered. "Helping, or hoping for more charity?" Before Oliver could answer, a sudden noise outside drew everyone's attention. The distant thrum of helicopter blades. The air trembled as a sleek Whitmore Aviation model descended toward the helipad, shining in the sunset. Richard smirked, assuming it was one of their fleet being repositioned. But Oliver looked up, recognizing the insignia, a custom blue and white design he had once worked on as a contractor before losing his company. He turned slowly toward Richard and Eleanor, his voice steady but firm. "That's my helicopter outside," he said quietly. The crowd went still. Eleanor's face drained of color. Richard's eyes widened. Oliver continued, his voice gaining strength. "I built that model years ago. The prototype you now sell under Whitmore Aviation. I designed its stabilizer system when I still owned Skyreach Aerotech. Your company bought the design after my bankruptcy. You made millions from it, and I lost everything. My business, my home, my family. But that's my work flying up there." The words hung in the air like thunder. Eleanor turned to her husband, realizing the truth. Whitmore Aviation had indeed acquired several small startups during that period, including one that matched Oliver's name. She covered her mouth, pale, as Oliver picked up his daughter. "You don't have to feel sorry for me anymore," he said softly. "You already helped the only thing that mattered, her life. The rest I'll rebuild myself." He walked toward the exit, Ivy resting her head on his shoulder, while the helicopter's blades spun slowly above them, like destiny finally circling back. Eleanor stood frozen, tears filling her eyes. She whispered, "He never needed charity, he just needed a chance." As Oliver reached the doors, she called out, "Mr. Khan." He turned. She smiled through tears. If you're willing, we could use someone like you back in aviation, not as charity, as a partner." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'll think about it." And for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever: dignity. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the helicopter lifted off, its shadow crossing the city like a symbol of rebirth. Ivy waved, giggling, and Oliver whispered, "That's our future, baby girl. We're flying again." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal, because every act of compassion can change a life, sometimes even save one. Special request: comment below. Do you believe second chances can rewrite destinies?